도나도나 머니돈나 시작하겠습니다. 특별한 손님 모셨습니다. 자기소개.
안녕하세요. 베스트웨거 법인 대표 조이스고입니다.
안녕하세요. My name is Stan Sonu, and I am Misuk Sonu's son. I'm a physician at Emory University School of Medicine. I also work for Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and I'm an internal medicine doctor and a pediatrician.
네, 안녕하세요. 파이닐 부동산의 조인입니다.
안녕하세요. 조이너스케어 대표 최은숙입니다. 오늘 특별한 손님 모셨다고 제가 시작할 때 얘기했었는데요. 선우미숙 언니의 아드님이 이 자리에 나오셨습니다. 저희가 남자를 여기에 직접 모신 거는 처음이에요. 그래서 그것도 되게 특별하고 또 누구의 아들이다, 딸이다, 자녀가 나오는 경우가 참 없잖아요. 그런데 저희가 오늘 특별히 한국 이름은 선우철 씨거든요. 선우철 씨를 모셨어요. 이유는 저희가 몇 달 전에 이민 1세대 엄마이면서 이민자이면서 그 아픈 세월을 견뎌온 얘기를 우리끼리 한번 해본 적이 있었어요. 그런데 거기 댓글에 보면 그런 분들의 자녀들이 남긴 얘기가 있었어요. 그때 저희끼리 하는 소리로 그러면 정말 2세들은 어떤 생각을 할까? 세컨 제너레이션은 어떤 마음으로 미국 생활을 할까? 그런 얘기를 했었어요. 저희가 자녀들하고 얘기를 할 때 가끔 그런 얘기를 하기도 해요. 뭐 너는 영어도 잘하고 너는 공부도 잘하고 너는 안 힘들겠지만 엄마는 어디 가면 아직도 힘들어. 이러면 분명히 그렇게 얘기해요. 나도 힘들어, 애들이. 그런데 우리는 영어를 잘한다는 이유만으로 애한테 야, 내가 더 힘들거든? 이렇게 얘기를 하잖아요. 근데 요런 얘기까지도 굉장히 힘든 게 우리가 아이들하고 언어 장벽이 있어요. 아무리 최선을 다해서 애들한테 한국말을 가르쳐도 속 깊은 얘기를 아이들하고 나눌 정도로의 우리의 영어 실력이 안 되고 아이들의 한국어 실력이 안 돼서 사실 굉장히 표면적으로만 약간 좀 가족 같은 그런 느낌이 없지 않아 있어요. 그래서 아이들하고의 깊은 얘기를 못 하신 분들 굉장히 많으실 텐데 오늘 우리 선우철 씨의 그리고 미국 이름은 스탠이거든요. 스탠의 얘기를 들으면서 우리 아이들은 어떤 생각을 했을까 그런 걸 한번 짐작해 보시고 아이들하고 속 깊은 얘기를 나눌 수 있는 기회를 만드시면 어떨까 싶어서 어렵게 이 자리를 마련했어요. 우리가 그냥 뭐 시쳇말로 그냥 하는 얘기로 와 선우미숙 씨 아들 잘 키웠는데 그렇게 얘기를 하잖아요. 그걸 뭐로 얘기하냐면 의사니까. 그렇잖아요. 의사니까. 그리고 이제 우리가 뭐 자녀 아주 잘났어요 이렇게 하면 뭐 돈을 잘 버니까. 우리 정말 잘 키웠을까요? 그 얘기 한번 해보고 싶어요.
Wow.
그런 얘기 엄마랑 같이 교회 가면 주위에서 하지 않아요?
Yeah, I grew up hearing my parents and my friends' parents at church talking about their children in terms of what they're doing. What kind of school, what kind of college, what kind of graduate professional school, what kind of job,
What kind of instrument?
what kind of instrument, what kind of sport.
Right.
And everything is about accomplishing, about doing, about succeeding. And I think one of the messages that, and I can't speak for all second generation Koreans, of course, but among my friends and I think one of the messages we received growing up or believed was that we didn't matter unless we were successful in all of these things. That unless we were good at school or the instrument or the sport or were attending church or got into a good college, that maybe we weren't as good as we were supposed to. We weren't successful in the ways that we should. I don't think that was true. I think most parents love their child no matter what.
그렇지.
I think, of course, yeah. I think our parents wanting us to be successful and accomplish different things in life came from a good place. They don't want us, our generation, to struggle. like maybe they struggled when they were children or their family struggled back in Korea. But I think maybe what was missing was that balance of, yes, go out and do your best, try hard, try new things. At the same time, even if you fail, we still love you. You're okay.
사랑과 자랑은 조금 다른 거예요. 어떻게 해도 부모님이 사랑하긴 하는데 자랑할 수 있는 자녀가 되기 위해서 좀 스트레스를 받았었나요?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've talked about with Sonu Misuk, my mom, and Sonu Inho, my dad, we've talked a lot about the Korean culture and how there's a lot of things for us to be proud about as Koreans. But one of the other things about Korean culture is that it's a culture where people constantly compare. And sometimes what happens, especially at church, is if I'm a first generation parent and I see another first generation family and their son is going to Harvard and is a neurosurgeon, now all of a sudden I question, am I doing what I should be doing as a parent? Am I successful? And now suddenly my son's, his performance, his life becomes my life. And I start to identify, am I successful because he's not successful? And so, again, I don't want the first generation community to feel ashamed about this. Again, I think all of this, I'm saying all of this because I think it was all very well intentioned most of the time. But these are some of the pressures that we faced. And yeah, I think, there's a quote from one of the authors that I like to read. He said that children don't experience what a parent feels towards them. They experience what a parent is.
최근에 한국 영화에 미나리라는 영화가 있었어요. 스탠은 봤는지 모르겠는데 그게 이제 퍼스트 제너레이션이 얼마나 힘들게 사는가에 대한 얘기를 봤는데 그걸 본 많은 세컨드 제너레이션들이 공감을 했다 그래요. 그러니까 사실은 엄마 아빠가 나가서 얼마나 고생을 하는지는 모르잖아요. 그리고 엄마 아빠가 고생을 해서 너는 고생하지 않기를 바래. 아까 그 얘기했잖아요. 나처럼 스트러글 하지 않는 애로 키우기 위해서 그랬다는데 그렇게 생각했을 때 그래도 나한테 뭐를 좀 아니면 우리한테 이렇게 해주는 게 더 낫지 않았을까? 뭐 이런 게 있나요?
Yeah, I think I very much, most of my friends actually have a difficult time saying anything bad or negative about their parents. Because they saw their parents working at the store 7 days a week. They saw their parents working at the dry cleaners. They saw their parents argue over finances. They saw their parents give up on their dreams so that their children could have dreams. They saw their parents not have friends so they could work and they could provide. So we saw all of that. We had a front row seat to that growing up. And even if mom and dad didn't say anything, we still could see their sacrifice through how tired they were, what pains they had, the headaches they would have. We could see the stress on their face. So I would say that more often than not, the second generation has difficulty even acknowledging how they feel, because once they start to wonder, am I okay? Is there something that I went through in my childhood, in my family, that I'm still dealing with today? It's very difficult to even think about that, because what shuts that door is, I don't want to betray my family. I don't want to say anything bad about my mom. I don't want to say anything bad about my dad. And so because they have such loyalty, I don't actually think many second generation or many of our community here in Atlanta actually know or have made sense of their childhood.
Because you probably don't want to visit it, because then you feel like you're betraying your parents already by thinking about it even.
Exactly.
So you don't face it, and the problem becomes even.
Right, and I think that's when it becomes really complicated. And one of the things that, one of the signs of healing actually is in general is when you can hold two or more things to be true, where you can say, my parents did the best they could. At the same time, my dad was stressed, and when he was stressed, he would drink a lot. And he would come home and he would make the whole house scared.
Right.
Right, so he did the best he could to provide. He sacrificed his body. But him drinking, coming home, exploding, having a tantrum on everybody made me scared as a child. And no child deserves to be scared like that, right? So, one of the things that I think we have to help people understand is that more than one thing can be true. As an adult now, as a second generation, we can acknowledge that, yes, our parents did the best they could, but at the same time, there may have been experiences that we went through in our family that were harmful to us. And again, it's not to say, it's hard to talk about that, right? We're not used to talking about both things being true, equally true.
친구들하고는 그런 얘기를 해요.
Well, because my friends are probably sick of it. Because the reason I talk about this so much is because I learned about trauma about 8 or 9 years ago, when my son was a baby. And at the time, I was a pediatrician. I was finishing my training. I thought I knew how to raise a baby, but there would be times when I would come home and I would be tired, I'd be stressed, and he would do something like a baby does, and I would yell at him. And afterwards I'd feel such guilt, like, why am I yelling at a baby? I love him so much, why am I yelling at him? And then I learned about trauma and started to wonder, is some of my behavior, the reason I yell, the reason I have such a short temper sometimes, does that have something to do with my childhood? And basically, the more I learned about trauma, the more it changed me. It changed me as a father. It changed me as a husband. It changed me as a son. Changed me as a brother. So it transformed my relationships and made me, I hope, a more caring and thoughtful, kind person who has more grace for people. So that's why I talk about it a lot, because
그러면 이제 같은 세컨 제너레이션 친구들하고 이런 뭐 차일드후드 트라우마나 뭐 가족 관계에 대해서 얘기를 하면 친구들이 아까 시거윗 한다 그랬잖아요. 그런 얘기는 하지 마라고 얘기를 해요. 아니면은 그냥 나는 이게 나한테 굉장히 힘든 일이야 이렇게.
Sometimes it's both. Some people, it makes them feel very uncomfortable because they're just not used to thinking about how they feel. The human body, we have two sides of the brain, right? A left brain and a right brain. The left brain is very rational. It has good memory. It able to tell a story. It allows you to tell a story. It's how you can, people say it's where your math ability comes from. The right brain is where you feel, and where you can look at another person and see how they're feeling inside. And I think a lot of Korean Americans in my generation have a very strong left brain, but an underdeveloped right brain. And so when you start to talk about, hey, what do you feel? It's uncomfortable. I don't want to go there. My dad, I never saw my dad talk about emotions. Why should I? I think in Korean culture, men don't cry, right? The two times men cry is
Yeah,
when they
when they're born.
when they're born and when their
Parents
parent passed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's actually it's a bit wild when you think about it, because when a baby is born, regardless if they're a boy or a girl, they cry. And in the first year of life, when they express a need, they cry. So crying is communication. Crying is not bad. There's some point in life, though, in childhood, where a boy is told, "Stop crying, stop crying. If you cry, you're gonna get in trouble. If you cry, I'm gonna reject you." And that's when a lot of my friends in my generation. That's why, even to this day, they don't know how to cry. They don't know how to. They only feel anger or sadness. There's no other emotion. But there's so many more emotions in the human experience than those two things.
Oh, it's interesting to hear that, because like you're only in 40s, right? Well, only 40s I say. 지금 미국은 근데 we're swung to the other direction, right? 그래서 emotionally 얘기해야 돼, emotionally 남자도 해야 돼. We totally like changed our position. 내가 보기에는 I do not like this at all. See, if I were to choose a man, right? 나는 I want a strong man.
Yeah.
If it lacks some emotional quotient, let's say, I'd rather take that over anybody. Because 우리가 너무나 다른데, men and women are so different, right? 그래서 I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're told that, but I think 이거를 잘 딜하고 얘기를 하면은 I think it's better to be that way than being weak or being told that you got to express your feelings. I mean, like.
Yeah.
I'm not for it at all, actually.
Right, I understand that. Yeah, and I would say that it's not about weakness. Emotions are not about weakness.
No.
It's about fullness,
Right.
wholeness.
Right.
And I think one of the benefits to it is if you have a man who does all the things that are typically masculine, in Korean culture, that he's a provider, he works hard, he doesn't complain. But if he is emotionally aware, what that means is that he will actually have an ability to communicate with his spouse in ways where she feels seen and understood. I think we all want that. It's not about, again, it's not about weakness. It's not about, he
Right,
he
right,
cries because he gets a paper cut. I think that's where we sort of distort the message.
Right, exactly.
I think what we all want are people in our
right,
lives
right.
who, like, for example, you want a pastor who can understand what you feel, but just doesn't tell you, repent, fix your behavior, go on. Just do it. That's what the Bible says. Just do it, right? You want a pastor who's like, what you're going through is really hard.
Right, who can empathize with
You're right,
that.
who can empathize, like the human skill. And I think it's just, I mean, I can only speak for Korean Americans in Atlanta, but it's a rare thing for men to be comfortable with that kind of emotional availability.
But then, like, you guys have more opportunities, I think, to actually see it and feel it and do something about it, right? Like when you're in your 30s and 40s, right? You're still building your careers, for most of you guys anyways, and you're busy doing that. You're focusing on that, right? So until something happens, like what happened to you, you don't face it.
Yeah.
You don't have guts to face it. Not only that, you don't have time to face it.
Yeah.
You're emotional, there's no room for it, right? So I think it eventually happens. Like when you have to face it, right? 그래서 옆에서 그때 누군가 있어서 얘기를 해주면.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can certainly can happen like that, but I'll put it like this, because sometimes when I'm giving a lecture on this topic, someone will say, well, hey, it's so much easier for you guys to heal, but your parents couldn't heal. They were surviving, and their parents were surviving, right? And I say, of course, like we live in a different reality than our parents. Absolutely. I don't know what it's like to experience famine to the degree that my ancestors experienced famine. I don't know what it's like to feel the terror of napalm bombs coming down on my village. I don't know that, right? But I'll put it like this. What is, at this point in time, whether you're first generation or second generation, what is harder? Or what is easier? Is it harder? Is it easier to pretend like nothing ever happened and keep doing life as if nothing is wrong? Or is it harder to face the pain and ask questions and try to heal? Like, what is harder? What does our bodies actually want to do? I would say most of us want to act like business as usual. We want to scroll on YouTube. We want to go on Facebook. We want to work. We want to go on trips. We want to eat good food. We don't want to worry about this difficult stuff. So I think it actually takes a lot of courage to, and to face these pains. But I would say very clearly that, nobody, this is a long process.
Yes.
Healing. You cannot rush into it. You should not feel shame to rush into it. You have to be gentle with yourself. And if there's any advice I could give to a second generation, who wants to explore this with their parent, it's just to start with being curious. Ask your mom, ask your dad, ask your grandparent, ask your aunt and uncle what life was like for them in Korea. You don't have to say, Mom, Dad, there's trauma in my life. It's because of you. No, because that's not going to go anywhere. But I think for them, for the first generation to want to understand our experience, the first generation has to remember that they were children too. And, when you all were children, I bet there were times when you wished you had a different kind of connection with your parent.
나는 그 얘기를 들으면서 드는 생각이 항상 어떤 클루나 어떤 circumstance를 만들어서 conversation을 할 수 있는 어떤 뭐가 있어야 하는데, 예를 들면 우리 first generation이 second generation하고 같이 앉아서 이야기를 할 수 있는 어떤 분위기, 또는 그 다음에 second generation끼리 모였을 때 우리가 어떤 식으로 이걸 어프로치를 하면 좋겠는가에 대한 얘기도 좀 필요한 것 같은데, 그런 얘기를 해본 적이 있는지 친구들하고.
Well, it's hard to say because it doesn't happen that often. And I think sometimes second generation is afraid to ask first generation questions.
The way that you try to explain, ask them how they raised, and then what's their relationship and childhood story, something like that. That's a very good way to start, I guess.
Yeah, and because one of the things about trauma is it often results in silence. So you as children, your generation as children experience, things in the Korean War as children. And you were afraid, but your parents never talked to you about that. So you just learn how to deal with fear by yourself. You grow up to be adults, parents, you move here and have our generation, and still there's just silence about those experiences. So yeah, I think one of the best ways to begin that healing process is to share stories. And just, you don't have to, and what I love about sharing stories, especially when I hear from my parents, is every time there's a story of pain, there's a story of survival. There's a story of trauma, there's a story of resilience. It's never just the trauma, right? Because they always survived it.
Exactly.
And then I learn a bit about myself. This is who I am. I have their blood. I have their blood of survival and resilience in me. It's not just the story of trauma, but I have to understand the difficult things to understand my strengths at the same time. So yeah, don't, second generation, like don't go asking people, don't go asking your parents, or don't go accusing them of any kind of trauma. That's
Even though that's true.
Well, I mean, there might be things that we hear, but I think actually, you know, a lot of times first generation parents know. They know what things may have been harmful to their child.
애들하고의 관계에서 표현 때문에 굉장히 달라지는, 그러니까 마음은 있는데 어떻게 표현하는 거가 culturally 다른
Of
거죠.
course, such a good point. There's cultural differences, right?
Oh.
That's very clear. And in Korean culture, the way a parent expresses love to their child is different from a white family in Peachtree Corners. It's just different. 근데, however, we grow up here, right?
그러니까.
We, as second gen, are not growing up in Korea.
Right.
We're growing up here. Our friends are people here. So we are experiencing the culture here. And that's why it's a very difficult thing to navigate, to talk about, because I can look back and understand, oh yeah, if my parents asked me about my grades, that's one way they were trying to make sure that I was on the right track, and that's how they expressed how they cared about me, right? I can understand that now, but as a child, one of the most important things that children need is to feel important or value no matter what. I think Korean parents love their kids no matter what, and that's very clear to me. But the child needs to experience that. And I think it's the culture difference, because we grow up here, we're not in Korea, so we don't develop the expectations that Korean children have in Korea.
But I think that it's a degree of which you are receiving those things. See, I think bad things happen, right? That your parents treat you badly and whatever, but not everything becomes trauma. I think it becomes trauma when you are pushed too far. Or I think, to me, the way I understand or I think of trauma is that when you're facing good and bad or good and evil, right? So we have different, like you said, not one-sided, right? We're multifaceted, right? So then I think even parents ourselves, it's hard to acknowledge. Yeah, there's this part that it's so evil. So I think the children, I think including ourselves, adults as well, 그런 trauma 생기는 것 같아요. When you're facing evil, how could this person be? We love our children, but we can actually be that. Acknowledging and understanding it is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
So we rather brush it under the rug and say,
Yeah.
well, you know what, I love you.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, it's not all love.
Yeah.
It is not. And the kids see it through. So you cannot lump it all, say, hey, I love you. It's not, you can't really
You're
repair
right.
anything. Like
Right. The fact of the matter is, you know, the parents abuse their children.
Right.
Parents do cruel things to their children.
Right.
But I'll tell you what. I mean, I work I have a pediatrics practice, and I work in a clinic downtown where I'm seeing families who are in extreme poverty, who are just dealing with just so much stress, and they tell me, I mean, some of the parents who I have developed a relationship with will tell me, like, I'm not doing what I should for my son, you know, and the way I think about it is, you know, if our parents were not hungry, if they weren't worried about money, if they didn't have to work so hard, if they had a community of friends they could belong to, like if they had all these other needs met, they would actually approach their children in a different way. But many of our parents were stressed, they're tired, finances are tight, they're worried about the store, you know, they don't have a community, the stress, you know, they have a mental health problem, and all of these things lower your threshold to have what we call the stress response. And that stress response, especially in Korean culture for men, is rage, violence, yelling, right? for but moms do it too, right? Not my mom, not my mom. No. But some moms do it too. Sure. Another way that stress response looks like is anxiety, worry. It can look like depression, numbing, right? So yes, humans at the end of the day are the ones who are, responsible. But I don't think it's necessarily this decision. I'm going to harm my child now. It's
No.
the stress is overwhelming,
Right.
and I lose my temper, and I lose control.
Right.
And I think in order for us to heal, the second gen, as much as they're able, I think that's something that we have to be willing to understand.
Right. I think from your perspective, second gen's perspective, I think that's the way, that's a
Yeah.
great way to approach it. But I think sometimes parents가 다 deserve하는 건 아니에요.
Yeah.
So I don't want our children to go and say, well, you know what, you have to go, reconcile with your parents, to do this, do that. But sometimes it's more harmful is what I've seen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you
right.
try, we all try, and then see if there's any way to make it happen or reconcile something or do something about it. 그렇지만은 그게 you don't have to. It doesn't have to end in a certain way. Just because your family is good, you get along well, your friends, your family members, and what have you. That does not mean my path is going to be that too.
Yeah,
So I hope
you're right.
people don't take it so like. 그러면 나도 우리 식구들이랑 다 잘 지내야 되는데,
yeah,
like
you're right.
another shame comes in. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because shame이라는 게 우리 culture에는 너무나 deeply.
It is.
When there's nothing to be shameful of.
우리는
It
배만
is.
나와도 쉐임해.
There's nothing to be shameful of.
Trust me, I have that blood in me. I think you're right. It's certainly not. It has to be a
Both ways.
two-way conversation. And sometimes the fracture has been too great for in this lifetime there to be, maybe even the possibility of reconciliation.
Right,
But at the same time, I do have hope because I've seen reconciliation in families where there shouldn't have been.
Right.
And reconciliation does not mean that next week we're going to be hugging or holding hands.
No.
Reconciliation may mean,
And now I understand you
I
a little better.
understand you,
Yes.
but
little
we still need to keep a distance to be healthy.
Exactly.
And that's okay.
Yeah. Yes, that's where I was going with this.
But I will say that, if there's someone in the first generation who does want to reconcile, one thing that the second generation did not hear a lot of from the first generation is, I'm sorry, or I was wrong. I made a mistake.
이제 물론 우리도 우리 부모님한테 그런 걸 안 배웠으니까 그럴 수도 있지만 사실은 언어 문제가 여기서 빠질 수가 없어.
나는 언어 문제라고 생각하잖아. 나는 정말로 언어 문제라고 생각해. 말이 안 통하는 게 아니고 생각이 있으면 커뮤니케이션 된다는 거지.
내가 이제 우리 딸한테 들은 얘긴데 우리 딸하고 사실 아들하고 우리 스탠은 이렇게 굉장히 비슷한 나이예요. 근데 딸이 SAT 봤죠? 우리 딸도 SAT 이제 1800점인가 그때야. 그다음엔 2400점인가가 됐잖아. 그죠? 아니 1800점 맞았다는 게 아니고.
Okay. 1400 is still good. Yeah, it's very good. Yeah.
지금은 2400점이 만점인 때가 있고 1800점이 만점인
그렇죠.
때가 있는데 그런 때인데 얘는 수학은 엄청 잘해. 우리 딸도 마찬가지야. 아들도 마찬가지고 수학은 엄청 잘해. 근데 영어가 리딩이 잘 안 되는 거야. 세 가지를 보는데 나는 답답하지. 야, 너가 영어를 그렇게 잘하고 영어만 하는 애가 학교에서 영어만 배우는데 어떻게 영어가 안 되니? 그런데 이렇게 얘기하더라고. 자기 친구 중에 자기랑 1, 2등을 항상 같이 하는 친구가 있어. 세라라고. 근데 그 세라가 아버지랑 맨날 신문을 같이 읽는데 매거진을 같이 읽는데 그리고 거기에 대해서 막 얘기를 한대. 근데 우리 집은 엄마랑 한국말로만 얘기를 하니까 왜냐면 나는 애가 한국말을 킵하는 것도 너무 중요하다고 생각을 해서 한국말을 계속 하니까 자기는 영어가 부족하다고 나한테 표현을 하는 거야. SAT 시험을 보는데 내가 영어가 부족하대. 그때 굉장히 마음이 아프더라고. 그러니까 이게 말을 할 수 있고 나도 사실은 대학을 미국에서 나왔어요. 그러니까 내가 그런 얘기 한 적 있었을 거야. 우리 애들이 히스토리를 배울 때 그 히스토리를 내가 이해할 수 있는 게 나한테 큰 축복이었다. 왜냐면은 뭐 티파리 이런 거 얘기할 때 그거를 영어로 얘기를 하면은 한국 엄마 입장에서 뭐 차 마시는 파티인가? 뭐 이렇게 받아들일 수 있는 얘기들을 나는 이게 보스턴 티파리가 뭔 줄 알고 여기서 공부를 했으니까 그게 나한테 굉장히 애들하고 커뮤니케이션 하는데 중요한 역할을 했는데 그렇지 않은 부모님이 훨씬 많잖아. 그러면 애들하고 어떻게 대화가 되냐고. 이게 언어가 정말로 잉글리시 코리안의 디퍼런스가 아니야. 학교에서 배우는 거를 몰라. 그러니까 그 누구 닥터 수스 있지. 그 닥터 수스를 몰라 엄마가. 그러면 어떻게 애하고 대화를 해? 우리 아들의 가장 페이버릿 그 책이 뭐였냐면 가필드 고양이였단 말이야. 그 만화책 막 이런 거. 그럼 엄마가 가필드를 모르고 가필드를 이해를 못해. 그 엄청난 조크가 그 안에 막 들어있잖아. 그 만화에. 이게 영어기 때문에 이해도 못하지만 내 백그라운드에 그런 게 없다고. 배워본 적이 없다고. 그러면 어떻게 말이 통하냐고. 그러니까 애가 아무리
그건 좀 다른 퀘스천인 것
아니
같기는
그 언어가 이 언어가 그 랭귀지에 대한 것만 있는 게 아니라 아까 왜 left side brain만 엄청나게 발달했다, right side 아니다 이럴 때 내가
Yeah.
딱 그 생각이 나는 거야. 발전시킬 수가 없었어. 애들을 발달시킬 수가 없는 게 애들하고 그런 놀이를 하는 것도 다르고 그런 역사를 아는 거 하다못해 이렇게 패링 주에 가잖아. 그럼 나는 저 꼬질꼬질한 양을 만져야 되나? 이렇게 생각한단 말이야. 근데 애들은 미국 엄마들은 막 이쁘다 그러고 만지고 그러면 왜 저러는 거야? 뭐 이런 생각을 하는데 그럼 지렁이 이런 거 말이야. 막 한국 그 미국 엄마들 막 지렁이 손에다 놓고 애들하고 놀아. 나는 막 기절하는데 그런 어떤 컬처가 복합적으로 있는 언어가 애들하고 안 통해.
근데 그거는 이제 깊이 공감할 수 없다는 거는
그래. 근데
그거는
그 공감이
이해하는데
없으면
그것 때문에
부모하고 어떻게 말을 해?
그렇기 때문에 어려워지는 건 아니지 관계가, right? 부모와 자녀 간의 어떤 bonding하고는 maybe not that important.
근데
Yeah.
이런 거는 있을 것 같아. 내 생각은 만약에 이제 우리 입장은 얼마든지 커뮤니케이션 잘 할 수 있고 소통할 수 있다고 생각을 하는데 일단 아이들이 우리 first generation 말고 아이들이 받아들이는 게 아까 나는 그 말이 지금 스테인이 설명하는데 예를 들어서 부모가 계속해서 뭔가 좀 나랑 커뮤니케이션이 없이 자랐어. 그럼 분명히 그 아이는 빈자리가 있을 거잖아. 그렇죠? 그리고 스탠이 지금 결혼을 해서 아빠가 됐잖아. 그럼 어느 시점에서는 스탠이 엄마 아빠를 그 보는 시각이 달라지기 시작했을 거라고. 그렇지. 왜냐면 어릴 때 내가 10살 때 본 엄마 아빠와 그때 가진 어떤 울분 같은 거 내가 우리 엄마 아빠는 이랬으면 좋겠어 하는 생각들이 이렇게 자라고 있었어. 그리고 20살이 돼서 대학을 갔고 그래서 성인이 돼서 결혼을 했어. 그리고 아빠가 돼서 우리 아이를 키우는 입장에서 지금 되게 많이 바뀌었지. 바뀌었을 거라고 생각해. 근데 그게 트라우마면 이때까지 남아 있었겠지만 내가 이해하지 못했던 부분이면 점점 시간이 가면서 어른이 되면서는 이해를 하면서 그게 조금 swept away가 되지 않았을까 하는 생각이 나는 드는 거야. 그래서 이제 그런 측면에서 생각해 보면 아이 입장에서는 어떤 아이가 내 익스프레스를 뭘 하고 싶어. 내 감정이나 내 지금 이야기를 나누고 싶은 누군가가 language barrier가 있으면 분명히 못했을 거란 말이야. 그 당시에 하고 싶었을 때.
Yeah.
그러니까 그게 쌓이면 이 아이는 계속해서 안 돼. 벽에 계속 부딪히는 느낌이 들면서 셧다운을 어느 정도 하면서 우리 엄마 아빠랑은 이야기가 더 이상 안 되겠어. 이런 생각을 하지 않았을까.
그게 서로 그 방향이 다른 걸 대화로 풀어나가기가 서로 다른 생각을 하고 대화를 하는데 그럼 맨날 끝은 네가 아빠를 이해해야지. 아빠는 영어도 잘 못하고 미국도 잘 모르고 이거로 끝나. 많은 생각들을 하셨을 거라고 생각해요. 오늘 굉장히 솔직한 얘기를 해주고 그 다음에 우리 알게 모르게 culturally 아니면 뭐 랭귀지 때문에 아니면은 그 패밀리의 상황 때문에 세컨 제너레이션 자녀들이 어떤 트라우마가 마음에 있다. 그 트라우마가 꼭 전쟁이어야 되고 뭐 자연재해야 되고 이런 게 아니지만 아주 작은 데서 온 트라우마가 있을 때 그거를 사실은 좀 해결하고 부모하고 이 셧다운된 도어를 열고 살고 싶은 마음이 있는데 그 시작이 서로 아빠는 어렸을 때 어땠어?
Yeah.
엄마는 어렸을 때 어땠어? 하는 아주 작은 얘기로 시작을 해서 그때 내가 너한테 그렇게 소리 지른 거는 참 미안하네 라는 한마디만 있다면 그 트라우마가 다 힐링이 될 수 있다. 그리고 이거는 스탠 개인의 생각이기도 하지만 또 스탠이 자기 친구들하고 여러 가지를 얘기하면서 세컨 제너레이션으로 느낌 받아 이런 얘기를 하는 거예요. 나도 우리 애들 얘기를 듣고 싶었어요. 근데 내 입장에서 내가 우리 애들한테 질문하기가 굉장히 어려워서 스탠한테는 좀 쉽게 질문을 한 것 같아요. 그럼에도 불구하고 완전히 정말 그 분노가 뭐였는지를 이렇게 정확하게 얘기하거나 디테일하게 표현하기는 어려운 자리였다고 생각해요. 스탠이 오늘 이렇게 해보고 야 그래 이거를 좀 더 딥하게 아니면 좀 더 스페시픽하게 이렇게 얘기를 해서 진짜 이렇게 확 터트려 버렸으면 좋겠다라는 생각을 한다면 다시 한번 나와서 여러분들하고 대화를 해보면 좋을 것 같아요. 한 가지는 오해하지 말아주셨으면 좋겠어요. 뭐냐면 처음에 우리가 자랑에 대해서 얘기를 했잖아요. 그래서 어떤 면에서는 그래 스탠은 의사니까 나가서 저렇게 얘기할 수 있지. 그렇지 않아요, 여러분. 그게 아니라
그래서 온 건데? That's why he's here.
우리 모두의 자녀들의 생각을 들어보고 싶어서요.
왜냐하면 지금 이제 스탠이 딱 그 너무너무 좋은 나이인 거야 이 얘기를 하기에. 왜냐하면
양쪽을 다.
왜냐하면 부모가 되었잖아. 근데 이제 문제는 그 reconciliation에 대해서 얘기를 했는데 부모와 자식의 그 어떤 그게 화해 무드가 안 돼서 그게 그대로 남아 있으면 이 아빠가 그
또,
next
그치.
generation에 또 그런 뭔가가 풀리지 않는 뭔가로 부모 역할을 해야 되는 것 때문에 또 힘들어질 수 있다라는 의미이기도 있는 것 같아요. 제 생각에.
20대를 데리고 오면 또 완전 딴소리를 하시고
20대를 한번
I'm not ready for this.
저희 돈나님들 어떻게 보셨는지 모르겠어요. 저희는 사실은 많이 저는 반성 모드가 됐고 여기는 약간 야 꼭 그렇게 생각할 필요가 있어라는 도전적인 모드가 됐고
아니 나는 반성을 해.
반성하고 있어.
반성을 하지만
그리고 이제 조회는 조회대로 각자의 생각이 다 다르다고 생각해요. 근데 무엇보다 이렇게 나와서 솔직하게 얘기하고 이 엄마의 친구들과 이런 대화를 나눠준 우리 스탠한테 너무나 고마워요.
감사합니다.
도나님들도 많은 생각이 있으셨을 거라고 생각해요. 많은 댓글 달아주시고 또 더 듣고 싶은 이야기가 있으면은 여러분 표현해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 시청해 주셔서 감사합니다.